Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo, and today's a long-awaited episode, in my opinion. Today, we're going to be talking about Zack Snyder's science fiction fantasy epic. A little bit of Star Wars, a little bit of Warhammer, a little bit even of a kind of Lord of the Rings, mixed with a little Akira Kurosawa. I mean, definitely not hiding its influences, all things considered, but we're talking about Rebel Moon. And we're talking about Rebel Moon, the director's cuts, okay? Because here's what you need to know about this movie, or this franchise, if you have no idea about any of it before this. There are like 4 different versions of this film that are out there, at least 4 different movies. There's part 1, PG-13, part 2, PG-13. That would be part 1, A Child of Fire, part 2, The Scargiver. Those are the PG-13 cuts of the film, which are largely panned. Largely destroyed by critics, and audiences just didn't like it. But now you've got the unrated director's cut, the extended version, which has an hour of more storytelling, by the way, which is good. And that's called Rebel Moon Part 1, or Chapter 1, The Chalice of Blood, followed by Rebel Moon Chapter 2, The Curse of Forgiveness. Can't say that I'm a fan of the names because it really doesn't matter. We're not going to call it part 1, part 2. These are just 2 parts of the same story. And it's definitely an ambitious project. Like, it's a massively ambitious project on Zack Snyder's part. Netflix gave him $166 million to do roughly a 6.5-hour movie. And you know what? All of that money is on the screen. Like, hands down, all of that money is on the screen. But let me tell you where I initially landed with this movie. I've been a long time Zack Snyder fan. Obviously, everything involving the Snyder Cut stuff I was supportive of. I love the Snyder Cut. We know that Zack Snyder works better in the long form. We know this, right? This is just, at this point in time, it's like, you can't even like argue against it. Zack Snyder, if he has the time to expand the world, expand the characters, expand the slow-mo, the movie's better. We all like it better. This is one of those times where this was Netflix, I think. I think this was Netflix looking at the popularity of the Snyder Cut, looking at the fact that the fan base showed up to help it win, or help Zack Snyder win 2 fan favorite Oscar awards when they did that a couple years ago. One for ZSJL and one for Army of the Dead. Never mind, Army of the Dead did quite well on Netflix in its opening weekend. Army of Thieves also did quite well on Netflix, but yet just now, today is August 7th, 2024, and we're finding out that the Army of the Dead universe is kind of, well, dead over at Netflix. It might be resurrected at some point in time. I don't quite know, but Netflix has kind of moved on from that, and Rebel Moon has a lot going for it. But I don't know if Netflix is going to want to invest more money into Zack Snyder at this point. And some of the word on the street is that even Snyder has been in talks with Warner Brothers again. I don't know. This isn't a movie news podcast, but I mean, I'm just saying there's so much going on with this as always. There's always things that are happening with Zack Snyder. It's weird to be a fan of his in 2024. It's been weird to be a fan of his for quite some time. But Netflix decided, and I'm sure like this was all them, is they wanted Zack to do 2 versions of the movie. They wanted a PG-13 version and an R-rated version. And I believe that what they were trying to do initially, and they've never confirmed this, but this is like the only thing that makes sense to me, is that they wanted to put the movie in theaters. They put Army of Dead in theaters for a couple days back in 2021, and it did almost $1 million, I think, in like 400 theaters. I think they wanted to get Zack Snyder fans to show up at the theater for Rebel Moon, but then you had the writer's strike, you had the actor's strike, and that delayed and just like destroyed so much stuff. Okay, yes, for the value of benefiting the worker, absolutely. But there's no denying how much ended up getting delayed or canceled or just kind of hurt as a result of this. So I think Netflix decided at that point it would be better for them to pivot the movie to just being a big winter release, their biggest winter release on Netflix, by having part 1 release right before Christmas, then part 2 release a few months after that, then followed a few months after that by the unrated director's cuts. My issue with that was I had said before the movie came out, and I instructed people, I urged people, I tried my best at influencing people to not watch the PG-13 version of the film. And the reason why, not because I don't want you to enjoy Zack Snyder, but because it's not complete. You know what I mean? It's not complete at all. And that is the biggest issue with those particular films, is that it's not complete. It's not finished. And the evidence was there with the critical response. Look at Rotten Tomatoes if you don't believe me. And that, of course, is a big problem, is because you want these movies to do well. I don't want any movie to do bad. I don't want any movie to be bad, but this was a poorly calculated situation. So I told people, just wait. Okay, so Rebel Moon came and went, the first one over the holiday break, and people watched it and criticized it. Part 2 dropped a few months later in April, kind of quickly came out of the conversation, although it did reboost Part 1 back into Netflix top 10. And then just this weekend, they dropped the Part 1 and Part 2 of the director's cut, which equals roughly about 6 hours and some change, if you don't include end credits. That is wild to me, that neither one of those movies really cracked to the top 10, right? They just didn't do very well. And the reason for that, not to besmirch the movie, but it really is the fact that people, they had expended all of their goodwill with 2 subpar versions of these movies before releasing the movie that had an hour of extra content, way more story, way more violence, way more gore, way more emotional impact. It was a completely great experience to watch. Whereas I don't ever feel the need to go back at all to try to see what they did with the PG-13 version to see what's different, because this is the definitive version of these movies. Will they eventually find a fan base? Yeah, 100%. Zack Snyder movies tend to do that. They maybe not all the time right off the bat, but they tend to do it. And I think Netflix is kind of in a position right now where they're a little bit concerned about everything involving Zack Snyder, but because Dan Lin recently took over Netflix as the head of their film division. And, he's not going to be greenlighting everything, I think, like Scott Stuber was, or Reed Hastings, whichever one of the guys it was. So they're in this place right now where Zack Snyder might be in a little bit of director jail as a result of this and may not be able to get the money. But $166 million, this movie guaranteed would make that amount of money back in theaters. They should have released this theatrically. I just find it to be wild that they didn't. But let's talk about it a bit, okay? Because Rebel Moon, all things considered, as I said before, is very much inspired by Akira Kurosawa, the Star Wars movies, heavy metal magazine, a lot of heavy metal, a lot of very sexy, very, very well-defined, busty, robots and stuff, as well as Warhammer 40K. So the fact that Henry Cavill wasn't in this movie is kind of sad. Snyder actually had the original idea for this movie while he was in college. And he really wanted to kind of build out his own Star Wars film. He actually pitched this initially to Lucasfilm shortly after its sale to Disney in 2012. He also then pitched this as a video game and a film to Warner Brothers a couple of times. And then at one point, the movie was going to be actually adapted into a TV series. And then it ultimately got pitched to Netflix, and Netflix kind of backed it up, right? It was, here we go. So I'm looking at this in the Wikipedia, following concerns from Netflix chairman Scott Stuber, so it was Scott Stuber, that the project would underperform due to its length, Snyder, unwilling to lose all the character, decided to split the film into 2 parts. I mean, and the thing is, when you watch the movie, the character moments are really good, albeit predictable. It's predictable, but it's still really good. And so this is a movie that they started, they put together after Army of the Dead. They started casting in November 2021 with Sofia Boutella taking on the role of Cora, Charlie Hunnam, Jimon Hunsu, Ray Fisher, Jenna Malone, Stas Nair, Bae Doona, Stuart Martin, and Rupert Friend joined the project in 2022. Friend ultimately wasn't in the movie. I think he was replaced by Ed Skrein. Yeah, there we go, Ed Skrein. Who, by the way, did a great job. Both Rupert Friend would have been great in this, but I think Ed Skrein was really awesome as Atticus Noble, or Admiral Noble, the bad guy. His name is Atticus Noble. That's right. So they got this thing done. They shot the movie, came out on Netflix. Let's just talk about it. I don't need to go through all the history on it right now. This is an epic movie. This is a very ambitious film. It's also wildly simplistic in regards to its overall story. What you have is you've got Cora, Well, no, the whole opening of this movie. This is where it kind of throws you for a bit of a loop in the opening of the movie. It takes place on a small on a planet that's being destroyed by the Imperium, which is, I mean, again, the Imperium entirely, Warhammer, right? But they're destroying this like city. The king and his family are like the last people standing. They're trying to fight. They ultimately fall victim to Noble as he forces the son to kill the father, and like the whole point of that, I think, ultimately is that you've got like the dad says, I forgive you, as the son goes to kill his dad. Right. And part of that was interesting because like, it was like they dragged the kid away and you think that it's going to be like the Cora is going to be one of the surviving kids, right? Like that's kind of what they make you think. No, it's not. It's not at all. They drag the kid off and they force him to join the Imperium. And then it picks up a little bit later. Like you don't know how many years. Is it years? Is it whatever? They mentioned the slain king. So you go, okay, there's something about a slain king. But then they end up on the planet, the little moon of Velt. And this is where it's very, like Norwegian, very Viking. Corey Stroll plays Sindri, the leader of the village. They harvest grain. They sell their grain that goes, to the Imperium and whatever. That's kind of what they do. But what happens is the Imperium is looking for Devra and Darian Bloodaxe, which okay, like let me just kind of, I'm just going to, that was one of the weakest parts of the film for me. Okay. Like there's these like, these are like rebel leaders, right? Trying to fight back against the Imperium. Obviously, that is why in the beginning of the movie, why they were attacking that planet, because the planet had given shelter and sanctuary to the Blood Axes. And then they were just destroying them because of that. And like this is the thing too, other people knew about this, and yet another king was also granting them like safe harbor and everything else. It's almost like, I don't know, people are kind of okay with putting themselves on the line for this, I guess. Well, it's kind of the whole point of the movie is that, people who you wouldn't think would stand up against the Imperium are standing up against the Imperium, even at their own peril. And I'm like, okay, that was okay. But I just feel like the Blood Axes were this like there was a lot of build up for them being badasses, right? Ray Fisher, as Darian Bloodaxe. Dude's in the movie less than 10 minutes, like flat out. It's like they're completely pointless characters. And that might be one of my only really real criticisms is like even Charlie Hunnam's character, Kai, who you think is like this scoundrel type Han Solo type character, is like, or maybe like a Lando Calrissian type character. No, it's more like Benny from Total Recall. And it was just kind of like they got Charlie Hunnam in this movie, and you think because he's a big enough name, I would argue out of everyone in this that has on screen, bona fides, I would argue that Charlie Hunnam is probably the biggest person, and he's taken out back and yeeted at the end of the first movie. Pretty like, I don't want to say unceremoniously. I like this death, but then like it was so quick, and then you just forget he existed, which was kind of the damn point. Same with the Blood Axes, right? They're like, oh, we need to find the Blood Axes and everything. I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm very much getting ahead of myself here, but that's kind of the whole point, right? So you have the Imperium comes to Velt. They get told, have grain for us within 5 weeks, and then we'll be back. And we're going to leave troops here that are going to make sure you guys do what you're supposed to do. Think of the movie. It's basically kind of like, that's very Seven Samurai-esque right there. Okay. But for modern audiences, it's essentially A Bug's Life. That's basically what it is. Hopper is leaving, is just not Hopper. It was whatever Kevin Spacey's character was. The grasshopper. I think that was Hopper, right? He goes, okay, we're going to come back at the end of the season when the final leaf falls, and we're going to get our grain. We're going to get our seeds. That's going to be what we want. Here's the same concept. But they leave behind a group of soldiers, and this is what was really interesting. Is like this is where I have to give mad props to the actors who played these soldiers. Is that in this particular situation, these guys are bad. Like the actors really portrayed these like scummy, violent, sociopathic rapists, because that's what they are. That's what they were. Like, they were going to do that to this girl named Sam. And like, it leads up to this whole scene where Cora then decides she's going to go and like save the girl. And of course, Cora being like a badass, kind of, I don't want to say like a super weapon, but she's been trained her whole life to fight for the Imperium. She knows how to fight. She ends up going in there and just effing all of these dudes up. And it was a really good scene. It was really intense. The buildup, Junkie X or Tom Holkenborg, his music was fantastic. The use of slow-mo, the cinematography was excellent. Like I wanted to rewind the scene and watch it again. That's how good it was. That's how much I enjoyed that sequence. And a lot of the action in the movie is very slow motion based. It is. And that might turn some people off, but the way I view it is like, look, this is not a comic book adaptation, but this is a very, very like visually appealing, visually stimulating movie to watch. It is beautiful. Zack Snyder was the director of photography this time around. Okay. He did the same thing with, Army of the Dead. Army of the Dead, my complaint was that Zack had used this dream lens for these close-up shots, and it was completely like distracting. I didn't like it at all. He did something similar here with the depth of field, but it created this kind of like skewed vision behind the character, behind the actor, but it wasn't like completely blown out. It wasn't like dreamlike. There wasn't the bloom effect. It was this odd kind of like streaking effect, but it was good. It didn't draw your attention away from the focus. Like he really upped his approach on the cinematography here. And again, like all like the slow-mo scenes and everything else were so beautiful. You can see almost like every detail. It is epic on that front. It isn't like done. It's done in a way to show you how like the feel in the moment. I cannot speak highly enough. The cinematography is awesome, right? It's like not like the most inventive, but it was just the way that it was done artistically is really cool. I mean, there are some times, not going to lie, there are some times you're watching it and you're like, all right. Like it does, every shot doesn't need it. Okay. Like, I sat down like the first night and I watched like 2 hours of part 1. And then last night I finished up part 1 and then I'm like, I'm going to do like an hour of part 2. And I ended up watching the entirety of part 2. For a movie that is basically like 6 hours long, it is paced incredibly well, right? It is. Some people might disagree with me on that. I feel that it's paced incredibly well. It keeps you engaged from scene to scene to scene, and you want to know where it's going to go. And when it gets into that final battle in part 2, it's like the last hour of the movie is just people getting murked. And I mean murked. Like villagers getting slaughtered. It is wild. It's crazy, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. I really like the cinematography. I really love the soundtrack. I love the visuals. I love the world building. The world feels lived in. It feels, I'm not going to lie, this is kind of like how Peter Jackson made Middle-earth feel lived in with The Lord of the Rings. That's kind of why I brought it up. That's the vibe that I got. Some people out there might disagree because it was shot digital and it's very, a lot of CG and everything else, but the world does feel lived in a way that Star Wars felt lived in with the original films. The prequels, not so much because it was so much CG and so much, over the top stuff. But the originals, the world felt lived in, and here this feels lived in. And I like that quite a bit, which is why I really wanted to spend more time exploring the rest of the universe, getting more information. Because there were times where like the creature that runs the Dreadnought, the lady that powers the Dreadnought ship, that is something that we get a little bit of info about, like not like just like there's more beings like her and that Korra is going to eventually find them. Like that's really about it. And then there's other things like the Jimmies. The Jimmies are this race of kind of like robotic knights. And they're not really just droids. Like I thought it was like C-3PO, but like Liam Neeson from Taken. And here it's Anthony Hopkins kind of going on this journey of discovery. And I know this is it seems very similar to like that new movie coming out from DreamWorks in a few months called The Wild Robot. My daughter in kindergarten was reading that book for her class. I was reading that book to her at night. And it's very similar in regards to like a robot kind of becoming self-aware and then trying to like figure out the world. But in this case, like the Jimmies are designed to, or basically are told that they have to, like serve the king. The king is dead. The Princess Issa is dead. So they don't really have any kind of motivation, right? They don't have anything that they have to do. So we don't really know much about them. Are they sentient? Are they robots? Are they a race? Are they a species? Like certain things we don't know. There's a podcast that they have that gives you more of a history, a deeper dive into the lore that they just put out. And like a couple episodes, or I haven't listened to it yet, but I hear it's mostly just sex stuff. Not against it, to be fair, but it's okay. But the Jimmies are interesting because we're watching kind of like, it kind of keeps cutting back to him as these like interstitials about him like helping the villagers like refix a dropship and him overseeing everything. And then him, helping when necessary, when there's like some bounty hunters that are kind of, relaying their information back to the Imperium and whatever. Like, a lot of it again is like he comes, this is okay. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but like in part 2, there's these bounty hunters that are overlooking the village, and they're sending information back to the Imperium, so the Imperium knows that they're being lied to, and they set up this big attack and ambush. He knows that they're doing it. Like we see him see them, but then right before they reveal a very key piece of information, he then murks them. I'm like, they've been there for days. You've known that they've been there for days. Why did you wait until right then to kill them, right? Obviously, he's meant to be like a peaceful robot sort of thing, but it's like if you know what they're doing, and he was going to kill them anyway, because it's pretty apparent that that's what's going to happen. That's like the Deus Ex Machina part of the movie. It's like Jimmy's kind of that character. I thought that was a little bit, like, all right. Like, I get that. Again, like minor complaints that I have, very minor complaints. And so like, again, as they get to come back to the main story, it's like once they, get out of there, like, and they start trying to find the warriors to help out, they kind of go through the list. They meet Kai. And, Kai is like, okay, I'll help you guys find some people. So then they go to this, they go to this like one town, like one place, and they find what is that guy's name? Tarek, right? He's a nobleman turned blacksmith, and he is bound to a guy named Hickman. He's indebted for like years to this guy named Hickman, played by Ray Porter. And he can bond with animals, like that's his ability, but like that's all he does. And so he then joins the team. And then they go and they find Nemesis. And she's like a cyborg sword master. So she's got the ability to like heat up these blades that look like lightsabers, but they're not lightsabers. Right? And it's like she's really cool. And we get a whole scene with her fighting Harmata, this giant like Shelob-esque spider played by Jenna Malone. It was a good scene. And so then they add her to the list, right? Because it's basically just they keep finding people and pretty quickly adding them to this like ragtag crew of people. And then they go and they find General Titus, who's played by Jimon Hunsu. And he's like a drunk who is, like just kind of waiting to die sort of thing. And they quickly get him on board. And I understand why they did that for brevity. They did it for time. And everyone had a reason to want to fight the Imperium and then put up a fight in order to like stop it, like spill the blood of the Imperium. Like it would be very easy to get them on board. But then of course comes like, the betrayal, right? The betrayal by Kai after they get Darian Bloodaxe on board, played by Ray Fisher. Again, he plays it so over the top, like he was really like a wasted character. I know he's friends with Zack Snyder. I'm not the biggest Ray Fisher fan. He was in and out of the movie to the point of where I'm like, okay, great. And then like, then you got the double cross, and then you've got the fight, and, Cora kills Noble, and then we think Noble's dead, but then they bring Noble back from the dead, and they kind of do like a Darth Vader sort of thing. And that of course becomes like the end of the movie where we go, okay, now he's been resurrected and he's like more psycho than before, but he's been kind of imbued with the same kind of power from the being that like fuels the dreadnought. But again, we don't know anything about who that character, like what that creature is, what they can do. So it's a little bit, then there's a line that like, so like the creature, she fuels like the slip space, right? Think of it like, being able to travel at, like warp speed or jump to light speed or things like that. And so she has to recharge. Okay, fine. That makes sense. But they have to then, she's weak from the jump to go and find him. But then they need to go and like get a little bit more out of her in order to save Noble. And there's a line from a doctor character that just says, we were able to get a little bit more from the ungrateful bitch. And that made like, that line kind of caught me off guard. It's not that I'm like, fine, these guys are assholes. Like, I get it. But it just seemed like so like kind of weird because these guys hadn't really talked up until that point. And then they're just assholes. I guess it's part of it, right? And then of course from there, it's like, he comes back and now we're going to part 2 and they think that the war is over, that the dreadnought will go back and that the village is saved. And of course, no, they're coming. We know that they're coming. They want the grain. They want to fight everything else. And we get into that final battle. We get into like, again, the whole back half of part 2 is just war. And it's great. Like, it's great. It's violent. It's bloody. There's like guerrilla tactics. I mean, like people are just getting murked left and right, good, bad, or the other. Like, you don't know. It really did feel at any point in time like any of the main characters could be killed without question. They could just be completely murked without question. Like, you wouldn't even know because of like how many other people were just dying. And then, of course, you get into some moments where like these guys should be dead. Like they're just out in the open and all of these soldiers are running at them and like no one's just firing at the main guy. And of course, obviously, it's meant to play up that whole that whole storytelling approach, right? Where it's like, oh, the main characters can't die. But then, they get into these moments where you think they're going to die. You're thinking Butch Cassidy, Sundance, all that stuff. And then they don't. So that part was kind of crazy. I will say though, there was a smaller character that I liked. There was, once Darian Bloodaxe dies, he's got one of his, like his second, like his number one. And it's a character named Milius. And she's like a nobody actor, right? Like her name or is Elise Duffy played her. And she just kind of joins the team as this like, yeah, I'm going to take his place and whatever. I'm going to fight for you guys. And you think she's expendable, but she gets a really good hero moment. And I grew to like her character because they kind of just accept her as being part of the group, even though she is literally a no one. And that again kind of speaks to the idea of what this is, right? So it was it was kind of funny. Again, like because you also have, I keep talking about the other side of this is like going back to the beginning of the movie. You have Eris, right? The prince who has to kill his father, and then he ends up kind of falling in love with Sam, the water girl who he wants to save from being assaulted, right? And then they have their storyline throughout the rest of the movie. And it's kind of weird because like, there's never a reference to what he did, right? Everyone else is kind of referencing what they've done that put them in the position to be a fighter. And that never goes back. I know we, the audience, know that, but like, he never really like does that until the end when Sam is almost killed and he ends up just like completely eviscerating a dude with a knife. Like he just lets out all of his rage on that. And that was a good scene, but I feel like they missed like the mark to really kind of be able to dive in and like just explore this character and give us a bit more, because it kind of felt like they're building this guy up to be part of the team. And he was, but he wasn't part of the team. He was part of the community. He was finding a home. And maybe that's ultimately what this is about. It's about finding home. It's about, atoning for past sins, finding home, finding family, things like that. I think the movie did a really good job to kind of set up those themes, even if they didn't always kind of like, hit the mark, so to speak. But then you get to like the what I really enjoyed about the last act of the film was Cora and Gunnar end up sneaking onto the dreadnought using that drop ship and the bodies, the bloody uniforms from the other soldiers that they had killed early on, right? That she had killed earlier on. And that was a great way of like getting on board in order to place the charges. I think of like how when the Millennium Falcon got tractor beamed into the Death Star and they were going to go and, disable it to get the hell out of there and all that stuff. This is kind of like that. This is very like, this is what The Last Jedi should have been, sort of thing. This is what The Last Jedi should have done. I was watching, I'm like, this is what The Last Jedi should have done right, because they did it right here. And them sneaking on and then fighting their way through, and then her kind of systematically, because she knows the ship, using parts of it to take out other parts of it in order to be able to like destroy everything. It's like, it was really, really, really good. And then leading into the finale of like the ship crashing, and then her and Noble battling it out, you know, and like Gunnar is mortally wounded, but he's still trying to like help and everything else. And then he ultimately saves her, and then she kills him and kills Atticus. And then, you know, and then they get down they get down to the surface, and then Gunnar sees that they won because here comes the Blood Axes, and that they're, you know, wiping up the other parts of the Imperium soldiers that escaped. And he sees that, and he knows that his village is safe, and then he dies. Even though that they love each other, it's a tragic way, right? Because everything that happened as a result of him having sold the surplus grain to the Blood Axes, which is not, the Imperium didn't know any of that stuff, but the Imperium, like, you know, that's what brought the Imperium their might down on the village. So he ultimately like died for his sins, to be fair. But he died in a noble way. And then they do the Viking funeral stuff at the end. And then you find out that Princess Issa, who Cora had killed, she is the one who was blamed for assassinating the king and queen and Princess Issa. Princess Issa, who apparently has life-giving abilities or life-saving abilities. You find out she's still alive. No explanation on that one. Just, oh no, she's still alive. So then the team gets together to go and try to find her, because now they're activated, and the rebel moon, the moon of Velt, is kind of now the home base of everything. Even though the Imperium knows that they're all there. That's going to be the funniest part going forward. So I don't know what's going to happen with number 3, if they're even going to do it. I think that this movie will find a fan base. I think this movie can absolutely find people to come around and coalesce around it. What Netflix needs to do is they need to put it out on home video. They need to allow me and others to buy a 4K Steelbook collector's edition of it. They need to promote this movie more. They need to work with Zack Snyder's fan base to promote this movie more, to promote it in a positive way of engaging discussion, which a lot of Zack Snyder's fans can and will do. There is a very toxic side of that should not be involved, but unfortunately you're never going to be able to get rid of them. And they should find ways to, like, again, they have comic books. I think they're going to do novelizations. They got the podcast. They're building out the world in a way that Star Wars did through the EU initially, or the new, you know, continuity back in 2015 when they launched that would be really good for this. And honestly, I'm excited for more. I think this is where Zack Snyder needs to be for right now, to build up this universe, to really expand upon it, and to give us something that is going to be a massive sci-fi fantasy epic, because this is a mix of Star Wars, Warhammer, Lord of the Rings, all that stuff. And you know what? I'm here for it. I really liked it. But as always, I want to hear your thoughts, your opinions on this one. If you guys have seen the PG-13 cut, let me know. Should I watch it? If you guys like the director's cut, let me know. And yeah, we'll talk again soon. Thank you guys very much. My name is Matt Jarbo. This has been Podio Commentary. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate everyone tuning in. Have a great one, everybody, and peace out.